Hello everybody! Sonic's world is full of places to explore and mysteries to discover. One of those places is Little Planet. Appearing over Never Lake for 1 month of the year, the Little Planet is a small world with many of its own mysteries left to discover. But one in particular is buried in the past, in a part of Little Planet known as the Whacky Workbenche. If Sonic travels to the past, he can find a statue of an angel that Robotnik would also find and remove in the present, and then replace with a replica of himself in the bad future. If Sonic finds it in the past, it showers him with rings and, well, that's it. The statue is shrouded in mystery, but for a while, the game it appeared in was also pretty hidden. Sonic CD is one of my favorite adventures with Sonic, but unless you played it on the Sega CD in 1993 or on PC in 1996, then like me, you didn't play it until the Gems collection came out in 2005. Or when the Christian Whitehead version was released for mobile devices in 2011. I spent many hours playing this game and didn't even know about the statue until seeing the Xbox 360 achievement for finding it, and even then, I didn't discover it myself until recently. But what does it mean? Welcome back to Loops and Lore. I'm Ben, and today we're going to be going over one of the Sonic game's most under-discussed mysteries and find a definitive answer for not just what the statue represents, but who. After finally locating the statue myself, I decided to do some digging. Several internet searches later, and I couldn't find anything that I didn't already know. The statue is only in the past of Whacky Workbench and is replaced in the bad future by a statue of Robotnik. It's also not a leftover sprite from Sonic 1, and other than an Easter egg that appears on Amy's fortune cards, shown once in an IDW Sonic comic, it never appears again. But there had to be more to it than that. My next step was to check the iceberg. If you don't know, an iceberg is a collection of facts and trivia layered over an image of one of these massive floating chunks of ice. The more well-known or obvious things are kept in the upper layers, but as we go below the surface of the water and onto the larger part of the ice hiding below, we also learn about the lesser known and downright obscure pieces of information about that subject. But in the case of Sonic CD, the statue is only on level 2 of the iceberg, and in any videos I watched that covered it, it's the same information as you would find in any standard Google search. Now, remember, Sonic CD is a video game that came out in the early 90s. Even though gaming was beginning to be viewed as less of just a nerdy hobby, it still wasn't at the same level of cool as we see today. At that time, the internet was also not as widely accessible, so news, especially about video games, was more limited. Now, a game will have lots of coverage and interviews documenting its production, even before sprites are drawn or code is written. But at that time, notes for game concepts were still drawn on paper, meaning that there are some things that are simply lost to time. So maybe the angel statue was supposed to be a more important part of the game, but was dropped later either due to storage space or time. It seems odd though to make sprites for it and the Robotnik statue and then only use them here. Sonic CD is much more exploration focused than the other 3 original classic games, but then again, maybe it was just a fun thing for players to find and nothing more? Yeah, as if we were gonna give up that easily. There had to be some kind of a connection between this statue and the story of the games. First, let's analyze the statue itself. The statue looks as if it was carved out of some kind of green stone and is standing on a base. The figure itself has feminine features and looks to be either an older teen or adult. It has a pair of wings, shoulder-length hair parted to either side, and some kind of a headband. It's wearing a dress that looks like something out of a Grecian myth, meaning that this might just as well be a statue of a goddess as much of that of an angel. Its overall pose, open arms, and smile suggest kindness, compassion, and grace. It's taller in comparison to Sonic, even without the base, and looks to be human. This is interesting because, other than Robotnik, there are no humans seen in Sonic games up until Adventure, which takes place quite some time later, but more importantly, outside of the islands where the classic series takes place. As far as we know, humans don't live on South Island or many of the other places that exist in the classic games, and even some of the modern ones. Following the current narrative seems to suggest that Sonic's world does contain humans besides Eggman, Gerald, Maria, and others, but that they exist on other continents while Sonic can coexist in some sort of archipelago of islands. In many of these locations, we have seen ancient wall pictures and carvings that resemble owls, echidnas, dragons, but the only thing that depicts anything even remotely human is the infamous wall painting that shows a prophecy of Sonic fighting Eggman for the Master Emerald. Otherwise, the statue is the only other depiction that so closely resembles a human in this world, other than ones made by Robotnik himself. The statue also exists only in the past of Little Planet, not in the present. How far back we travel or forward in time is a conversation for the future. Unless we're already there? Either way, the only other life we see on Little Planet are the strange dancing flowers and different species of small animals. It's not likely they made half of what we see on Little Planet, especially what's in Whacky Workbench. So there was probably a civilization there prior to Robotnik's arrival. But why would they have made this statue? What would it represent? As I was trying to build this theory, the more I looked at the statue and thought of its potential origins, one character kept coming to mind. And that character is Tikal. Although Tikal's story takes place long before the events of the classic series, her first in-game appearance doesn't occur until 5 years after CD's release. So it might seem unlikely that we could build any connections that far back. However, following the iceberg for Sonic 3 and Knuckles, we can find loose evidence pointing to a blurry image of Super Sonic fighting what appears to be a dragon that somewhat resembles Perfect Chaos. The original Japanese story for Sonic 3 stated that part of why Knuckles believed Robotnik is because he mistook the Death Egg for the egg of a legendary dragon. We would of course see dragons later in Superstars, so this little lore tidbit is still relevant. But I mean, of course it's relevant. Everything is canon. Right? Yeah, everything's canon. So it's not impossible that some of the story that we got in Sonic Adventure was originally planned as early as Sonic 3. And Sonic 3 came out a year after CD's release. Given how quickly Sonic games are developed, this could have been an idea that simply could not be developed around the events that split 3 into 2 separate games, Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles. And while Sonic Adventure did come out several years after Sonic 3 and Knuckles, with a few other releases in between, none of those titles seemed as connected as the original 4 games or the Adventure series afterwards. There were also many Sonic games that were cancelled between 94 and 98, so events depicted in Adventure could have been intended to be in those games as well. Adventure also contains several references to the classic series, and depending on the version you play, at least 3 references to Sonic CD. But Adventure also contains at least 5 different references to older Godzilla movies, including Perfect Chaos, who not only looks incredibly similar to Biollante, a character from a 1989 G movie, but the two even receive a similar send-off. So do all these references to older media and other Sonic games indicate that Adventure's story was written much earlier and that the statue was meant to be a reference all along? Maybe not originally, but I think we have enough suspicion to chase this theory all the way until its close. I know that if I just shake the book enough, the answers will just fall right out of it. Okay. So now we have a reason to believe that we could connect this classic era statue to a modern era character. But why Tikal? Well, Looking at Tikal's design, there are some similarities. So let's discuss those before moving on to the more solid evidence for this theory. Female characters often have a more human-like appearance to their male counterparts in terms of their physical appearance in Sonic's world. Though Tikal's design is more understated than characters like Rouge, Amy, or even Whisper, she still has some traditionally feminine features, as does the statue. Echidnas are often depicted with a hairstyle similar in design to that of dreadlocks. This is very different from the statue, which appears to have straight hair, but both cuts are long and parted in the front. Tikal and the statue are also wearing some kind of ornate headband. In terms of clothing, as I had said earlier, the statue appears to be wearing the type of thin robe that we often see characters of Grecian myth wearing. Tikal's clothes, on the other hand, are very different in design, but do seem to be traditional for the setting she appears and features a skirt. The skirt on the statue's original sprite is long, but doesn't go all the way down to its feet, and while Tikal's is shorter, it's longer in comparison to the skirt worn by Amy in either the classic or adventure series. Tikal is wearing a necklace, armbands, and some type of bracelets that are not shared by the statue. However, these are both in keeping with their own themes. The biggest difference, though, besides the angelic wings, is the fact that the statue appears to be human, and Tikal, while having some human features, well, she's not. But actually, this doesn't hurt this theory, it actually helps it. So now, let's move on to the more lore-centered reasoning. We learn from Tikal's memories that her father, I'll never get that right, so I'm just going to say it how I say it, and you guys will have to correct me afterwards. We learn from Tikal's memories of her father, Pakachamak, that he intends to use the power of the emeralds to expand his rule by force and conquer other nations through battle rather than through peaceful relations. During her memories, it would seem that her father was already involved in a campaign. Now, we don't know if Pakachamak wanted the emerald's power to press the advantage or to regain ground after a defeat, but either way, he was willing to take their powers at any cost, including the loss of his warriors and the life of his own daughter. Ouch. When Pakachamak reaches the Master Emerald, Chaos appears to stop him, and using the power of the 7 Chaos Emeralds, becomes perfect chaos. What happens next is recorded on the walls of the Mystic Ruins. Though hurt, Tikal does survive her father's attempt to steal the Emerald's power and awakens to see the ruined area around the Master Emerald Shrine. She realizes that Chaos is out of control and knows that without intervention, his destruction will only continue to spread until nothing is left. Tikal calls on the power of the Master Emerald, neutralizing the power of the Chaos Emeralds to stop Chaos, sealing the mutated Chao and her own spirit together in the Master Emerald, and ripping the landmass to be known as the Floating Island out of the ground and hurling it into the sky. That lore is pretty well established, but as far as we know, Tikal's story and that of her people is mostly lost to time, with the Mystic Ruins and the Hidden Palace Zone being all that is left of their great civilization, Knuckles being the last known descendant. What isn't discussed very often or in great detail is the other civilizations they were fighting with. In Sonic Battle, one of Gerald's memos talks about the destruction of the 4th Great Civilization. This, however, is a translation error from Japanese into English, and it should instead read the destruction of one of the great civilizations. Being as how this is a reference to Emerald and not Chaos, it appears that the Echidnas were not the only ones who attempted to use the Emerald's power to the same unfortunate end, but would also mean that the other civilizations would have seen or heard of the Echidnas' destruction and the fate of a piece of their land. After all, some of the Echidnas had to have survived and been left behind at the Mystic Ruins in order to have carved the terrors of Chaos Revenge into the ancient stone walls. Legends of these events must have certainly traveled across the land and reached other nations, possibly as they sought to claim the rumored Chaos Emeralds, land, or other treasures from the weakened echidnas. Stories no doubt would have been told and details changed or lost in the passing of time, as legends do. But what of Tikal's place in this story, this legend? How would she be remembered? Tikal was the daughter of a power-hungry leader, but opposed her father's will even to the point of giving up her own life. She was compassionate and kind, qualities that would have seemed too mature for a young girl her age, and out of her pureness of heart, she would sacrifice herself and use a miraculous power in order to put a stop to the destruction, separate the emeralds, and bring both Chaos and the Master Emerald far away from anyone who might attempt to use their power. These were qualities not associated with Echidna at that time. So if another civilization had heard her story and wanted to honor her deeds, they may have molded a statue that looked more like that of the advanced race of beings that lived on the larger continents, and more mature to match the greatness of her actions. And what better way to give shape to that legend than by carving it from an emerald-colored stone? The same color as the stone she used to end that terrible destruction. Now, if you're still not convinced it's Tikal, consider this. A deck of fortune cards, based on the ones Amy uses in the games and comics, contains a card that features artwork of the statue which looks almost identical to its in-game sprite. The wings are bigger, but are still present, as is the dress, traditionally feminine features, long hair, headband, and an outstretched pair of arms. The major change being that the face is obscured by water running down from the headband and from the palms of the hands. This seems like an odd change, as the statue remains the same in the Sonic Origins version of CD. Changing the statue to one that is a water fountain is not a major narrative difference, as it showers Sonic with rings in the game, so it's still showering you with something. But covering the face could have only been done for one of two reasons. Either because they thought a human's face would have been strange in context, or because they wanted to increase the mystery around it and possibly reveal it to be changed to someone else's face in the future without it feeling like a major retcon. But how does this change relate to Tikal? During production of Sonic Adventure, members of Sonic Team were sent to investigate ancient ruins in order to get a better understanding for what the mystic ruins should look like. Tikal and Pachacamac both get their names from ancient ruins believed to be built by the Mayan and Incan people. The name Tikal might be derived from the name Ti-Ak-Al in the Yucatec Mayan language. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but it could mean at the waterhole. This would make sense, as the culture around this city and control over it seemed to rely on whomever controlled the city's supply of water. Water, of course, in this type of city would have been essential for its people's survival. So if the statue was a reference to Tikal, who had subdued a being that appeared to control water himself, turning the statue into a fountain would actually suggest a stronger connection than before, and that's not all. We can see from the ancient carvings that depict Chaos's rampage that he flooded the land just like he would do later in Station Square. When Tikal uses the power of the Master Emerald to stop him and the land is ripped from the ground, much of that water would have washed off of every edge of the rising landmass, the same way we see water pouring off the floating island when it's lifted out of the ocean once the Master Emerald is returned by Sonic and Tails. We can imagine that to any other ancient culture who was watching this happen, it would have looked something like this. A storm wages during a cataclysmic event. A monster can be heard letting out an angry shriek as 7 lights scatter to the distant edges of the land. A massive quake shook the ground as a great mass of land that held the great Echidna people thundered upwards. Water poured from all sides as it pushed its way up through the storm clouds overhead. As the clouds cleared and the island rose higher, the droplets of water continued to rain down, creating a gathering of beautiful rainbows that slowly faded away with the clouds. The storm and threat of both Chaos and the echidnas was over for now. After these events, it's no doubt that other ancient cultures would have feared Chaos and the echidnas' return from their now untouchable kingdom in the sky. But excess rainfall draining off the edges of the island after any storm, and the scattered rainbows that would follow would have appeared to them as a sign that Chaos remained defeated, and reminding them of Tikal's great sacrifice. If the statue had been made in her honor, turning it into a water fountain would make sense, as the water constantly flowing would remain a symbol of her unending victory over Chaos's power, just like the water pours off the island. A symbol of her protection, the one whose spirit guards the emerald on a floating island. Angel Island. Well everybody, I hope you enjoyed that Sonic lore video. There's a bunch more where that came from, so stay tuned. I'm Ben, this has been Loops and Lore, and thanks for watching.